Welcome to the latest Zeal Access webinar. My name is James Radke, Managing Editor of Zeal Access, and today I will be offering a summary of how to make sure your newsletter is effective and, more important, legal. There have been a lot of changes in the spam laws lately, and the notion of just sending out a newsletter to people you think might be interested in your organization's activities is no longer acceptable. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to give you a brief background on Zeal Access. We are a company focused on helping patient advocacy groups with their communications, which includes websites, its content, and newsletters. Our staff has over 15 years experience in web design, advocacy, newsletters, and medical communications, and we want to use those skills to help advocacy groups reach their potential. Okay, on to the webinar. Creating a newsletter that is legal and effective. Emailing a newsletter to the people interested in your organization is a great way to keep them informed and engaged in your programs and events. You can send daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly emails, even breaking news if a drug gets approved or there's a change in regulations. The bottom line, you want the newsletter to be informative so that your audience will stay engaged. But there are a few things about that newsletter that you have to be aware of to make sure the people receiving the newsletter continue to enjoy it. And equally important, there are new laws in place that are specific to newsletters. And much of this webinar will be focused on making sure you understand those laws so that your newsletter is in compliance, as well as staying informative. So, what is the CASL law? CASL stands for Canada's Anti-Spam Legislation. First, the good news. You probably are not breaking the law. In fact, with most electronic mailing services, it is actually quite difficult to not comply with the CASL rules, as long as you're using their templates and services. More good news, if you are a nonprofit, some of these CASL regulations are not applicable, and I'll go into more detail on that later. Now the bad news, it is still fairly easy to break the law if you are not careful. These laws came into effect in 2014, so if you are using a template created before that, or using a template created by a non-professional, there is a good chance that that template is not in compliance. CASL basically has three things in it that you have to be aware of: consent, identification, and an unsubscribe mechanism. So first, consent. Consent means that only people who have agreed to receive your newsletter are receiving it. That means you've asked them physically to sign up to receive the newsletter at a fundraiser, gala, or a conference, or you've asked them electronically on your website if they want to sign up for it. As a safety tip, sending your newsletter to that person you just know would be interested in reading that on your fundraiser is against the law. And you could be fined. And the fines can be quite high. For an organization, the fine can be up to $10 million. One final comment about consent. There are two types of consent: express and implied. Express consent is similar to what I just described. It is someone who has wrote down their email address or name specifically to receive the newsletter. The implied consent would be a person who volunteered at your organization or attended a fundraiser, and the consent is implied. We at Zeal Access would suggest sending that person an email first, asking them if they want to receive the newsletter before actually sending it to them. In other words, you want to switch that implied consent to an express consent. Identification means the newsletter must state very clearly what the organization is. This should include your name, the address, phone number, and your URL. And the more information you can provide, the better. While this is the law, it is also good for business. If you want people receiving your email to trust you, you do that by showing them exactly who you are. And the third one is the unsubscribe mechanism. That means that somewhere in your newsletter, there is an icon that the person can click to unsubscribe to future newsletters. And if they unsubscribe to the newsletter but still receive the newsletter after doing that, your organization could be fined. It is strongly recommended that only one person be in charge of the mailing list. When multiple people volunteer to assist in managing the newsletter, different mailing lists can lead to confusion over which is the most up-to-date list that only contains those people who have subscribed to the newsletter. And this is a brief overview of CASL. You're strongly advised to go to their website at fightspam.gc.ca On the website, they actually provide examples and FAQs that are specific to charities and nonprofits and whether or not they comply with CASL. For the record, if you are just sending out news and information about your organization, CASL does not apply. However, if the main purpose of your newsletter is to draw attention to fundraisers or galas where you're basically asking people to donate money, then the CASL laws will likely apply. But again, to make sure you're in compliance or not, go to their website. Okay, now that we've covered the law, we also want to make sure that your newsletter is effective and people want to keep receiving it. First and foremost, you want to make sure it looks professional. So the first thing you want to do is, before you send out a newsletter, is send out a test email to yourself and look at it in different ways, in webmail, in Outlook, on your phone, tablet, laptop. And in each version, ask yourself this: are there any typos? Are the links working? Do the images and text size, are they consistent? How is the loading time? Is the width and length appropriate to the platform you're looking at it in? Also, is it, once again, easy to unsubscribe? And is it clear who the email is from? Also, you want to make sure the content of the newsletter is relevant to your audience. If you are sending an email to people all across the country, but the content is only about an event in Toronto, then don't send the newsletter to people outside Southern Ontario. Similarly, if your audience includes researchers and clinicians, they tend to want to know about the latest clinical research. They don't want to know about the latest fundraisers. Now, the reason I bring this up is that if you're sending newsletters that isn't appropriate for your audience, it is very easy for that person to at some point just click the file this as spam button in their email server. And once that happens, red flags begin to appear amongst the groups monitoring your emails. And yes, your newsletters are being monitored. And once a few of those recipients mark your newsletter as spam, it is very difficult to stop the exponential effect that that has on future newsletters. Now, these are just a few tips to get you started, and there are a number of factors that go into making a newsletter a good and reliable means to inform your audience is growing every day. Your newsletter email list is your currency. Invest in it wisely, and it will pay back greatly in its dividends. This has been a brief overview of how to make your newsletter legal and effective. If you want to learn more, feel free to contact me via jim@zealaccess.ca. Thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar, and feel free to go to Zeal Access for more tips. Have a good day.